The rain began, as it always did in Willowmere. Gently at first, a soft whisper against the cobblestones, a quiet conversation between sky and earth. Eleanor stood at the window of her bakery and watched the first drops fall, feeling the familiar shift in the air that came with every evening rain. The light was changing too, golden afternoon surrendering to the softer hues of dusk, and soon the street lamps would flicker on, casting their warm glow across the wet stones. The bakery had stood on this corner for over 100 years, built by Eleanor's great-grandmother in an age when bread was still the center of every meal, when a village bakery was as essential as a church or a well. The walls were thick stone, the color of honey in the lamplight, and the windows were small and deep-set, designed to keep the heat in during winter and the cool in during summer. Above the door hung a sign that read simply, "Thornton's Bakery," the letters worn soft by decades of rain and sun. Eleanor had inherited the bakery from her grandmother 30 years ago, taking over the ovens and the recipes, the early mornings and the late nights, the sacred responsibility of feeding a village. She had been young then, barely more than a girl, but she had grown into the role as naturally as bread rises in a warm kitchen. Now, at 62, she could not imagine any other life. The bakery was not just her business, it was her home, her purpose, her whole world. She turned from the window and surveyed her domain with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows exactly where everything belongs. The great stone oven dominated the back wall, its mouth dark now, but soon to be glowing with fire. The wooden counters were scrubbed clean, waiting for the night's work. Bags of flour stood ready in the corner, and jars of yeast and salt and honey lined the shelves. Everything was as it should be. Everything was ready. The rain intensified slightly, drumming a gentle rhythm against the windows. Eleanor loved this sound, had loved it since childhood, when she would sit in this very bakery and watch her grandmother work. There was something about rain that made the inside feel warmer, made the light seem brighter, made the smell of bread seem more precious. Rain was a gift, she had always thought. It reminded people to seek shelter, to gather together, to appreciate the simple miracle of a roof overhead and warmth within. She moved to the oven and began the ritual she had performed thousands of times before. First, the kindling, thin strips of dry wood that would catch quickly and burn hot. Then the larger pieces, arranged just so to create a bed of coals that would heat the stones evenly. She struck a match and held it to the kindling, watching the flame catch and spread, feeling the first whisper of heat against her face. The fire grew, crackling and popping, filling the bakery with the particular warmth that only a wood fire can provide. Eleanor fed it patiently, adding wood piece by piece, coaxing the flames higher, watching the stones of the oven begin to absorb the heat. This was the foundation of everything, the fire that would transform flour and water into bread, the heat that had sustained this village for generations. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the last light of day faded into the deep blue of evening. The street lamps came on, their glow reflecting off the wet cobblestones, creating pools of golden light in the darkness. A few villagers hurried past, collars turned up against the rain, heading home to their own suppers, their own fires. Eleanor watched them through the window and felt a deep contentment settle into her bones. Soon she would begin the night's baking. Soon the flour would be measured and the dough would be mixed. Soon the familiar alchemy would begin, the transformation that never failed to feel like magic no matter how many times she witnessed it. But for now, in this quiet moment between day and night, between the lighting of the fire and the beginning of work, she simply stood and watched and breathed and felt grateful. The bakery held her in its warmth, patient and constant, waiting as it had always waited for the night's work to begin. And Eleanor, standing at the heart of it all, felt exactly as she always felt at this hour, at peace, at home, exactly where she was meant to be. The fire had settled into a steady burn, the stones of the oven drinking in the heat, preparing themselves for the bread to come. Eleanor moved to her ingredient shelves with the unhurried grace of long practice, her hands knowing exactly where to reach, her feet knowing exactly where to step. This was the gathering, the first act of bread making, as important in its way as the kneading or the baking. She began with the flour, hefting the heavy bag onto the counter with a strength that belied her years. The flour was local, milled from wheat grown in the fields just outside the village, and it had a particular quality that no other flour could match, a sweetness, a depth, a connection to the land that surrounded them. Eleanor scooped it into her largest copper bowl, watching it fall like snow, feeling its cool silkiness against her fingers. The measuring was done by feel rather than by cup, a skill passed down from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before her. Eleanor knew exactly how the flour should look in the bowl, exactly how it should feel when she ran her hand through it. Too little and the bread would be dense, too much and it would be dry. The perfect amount was somewhere in between, a balance that could not be taught but only learned through years of practice. Next came the water, drawn fresh from the well that morning and left to sit at room temperature. Cold water would shock the yeast, hot water would kill it. The water needed to be just warm enough to wake the yeast gently, to invite it to begin its work. Eleanor tested it with her wrist, the way her grandmother had taught her to test a baby's bath, and found it perfect. The yeast was her favorite ingredient, though she would never say so aloud. It was alive, this powder that looked so ordinary in its jar, alive with millions of tiny organisms waiting to be awakened. Eleanor spooned it into a small bowl and added a splash of warm water, stirring gently, watching as it began to foam and bubble. This was the moment when bread stopped being just ingredients and started being something more, something living, something growing, something that would transform under her hands. Salt came next, coarse sea salt that Eleanor had bought from a traveling merchant years ago and had been using sparingly ever since. Salt was the ingredient that gave bread its depth, its complexity, its ability to satisfy. Too little and the bread would taste flat, too much and it would be harsh. Eleanor measured carefully, adding the salt to the flour and mixing it through so that every grain was evenly distributed. The last ingredient was honey, just a touch, just a whisper, added not for sweetness but for color and for the way it helped the crust turn golden in the oven's heat. Eleanor's honey came from Mr. Hendricks, 3 houses down, who kept bees in his garden and harvested their gift each autumn. She drizzled it into the bowl, watching its golden ribbon curl through the flour, feeling the connection to her neighbor, to his bees, to the flowers they had visited throughout the summer. With all the ingredients gathered, Eleanor paused for a moment of appreciation. Here was everything needed to make bread, the most basic, most essential, most ancient of foods: flour and water, salt and yeast, a touch of honey. Simple things, ordinary things, yet together they would become something extraordinary. This was the miracle that never ceased to amaze her, no matter how many times she witnessed it. The rain had steadied into a constant patter against the windows, a rhythm that matched the beating of Eleanor's heart, the pulse of the yeast beginning to work, the crackle of the fire in the oven. Everything was in harmony. Everything was aligned. The ingredients were gathered, the fire was ready, and the night stretched ahead full of possibility. Eleanor took a deep breath, centering herself for the work to come. Then, with the reverence of a priest beginning a sacred ritual, she poured the water into the flour and began to mix. The dough began as a shaggy mass, flour and water not yet fully acquainted, lumpy and unpromising in the bowl. Eleanor turned it out onto the wooden counter, the same counter where her grandmother had kneaded and her great-grandmother before that, and dusted it lightly with flour. Then she placed her hands on the dough and began. Kneading was an art that could not be rushed. It required patience, attention, a willingness to be present with the dough and responsive to its needs. Eleanor pressed the heel of her hand into the mass, pushing forward and down, then folding the dough back on itself and turning it slightly. Press, fold, turn. The rhythm was as natural as breathing, as familiar as her own heartbeat. At first, the dough was sticky, clinging to her fingers, resisting her efforts to shape it. This was normal, expected. The flour and water were still getting to know each other, still learning how to work together. Eleanor added a light dusting of flour and continued, patient as always, knowing that the dough would come together in its own time. The rain outside had found its rhythm too, a steady drumming that matched the press and fold of Eleanor's hands. She let her mind drift with the sound, thinking of nothing and everything, letting the kneading become a meditation. This was one of the gifts of bread making, the way it demanded presence, the way it quieted the chattering mind, the way it brought you back to your body and your breath. Gradually, the dough began to change. The stickiness gave way to smoothness as the gluten developed, the proteins in the flour linking together into long chains that would give the bread its structure. Eleanor could feel it happening under her hands, the dough becoming more elastic, more responsive, more alive. It was pushing back now, resisting slightly when she pressed, springing back when she released. She thought about all the hands that had kneaded bread throughout human history, millions of hands, billions of loaves, an unbroken chain stretching back thousands of years to the first person who thought to grind grain and mix it with water and bake it over fire. She was part of that chain, connected to every baker who had ever lived, participating in one of humanity's oldest and most essential acts. The dough was smooth now, supple, almost satiny under her fingers. Eleanor pressed a thumb into the surface and watched the indentation slowly fill back in, the sign that the gluten was properly developed, that the kneading was nearly done. A few more minutes, she decided, just to be sure, just to give the dough a little more love. She found herself humming as she worked, an old tune her grandmother used to sing, something about rain and roses and the turning of the seasons. The melody rose and fell with the rhythm of her kneading, filling the bakery with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the oven. This was contentment, she thought. This was joy. This simple act repeated countless times, never failing to bring her peace. Finally, the dough was ready. Eleanor shaped it into a smooth ball, feeling its perfect weight in her hands, admiring the way the lamplight gleamed off its surface. It was beautiful, this ball of dough, beautiful in its simplicity, beautiful in its potential, beautiful in the way it represented everything good that could be created from simple ingredients and patient hands. She placed the dough in a large bowl, covered it with a clean cloth, and set it in the warm corner near the oven where the temperature was perfect for rising. Then she stepped back and simply watched for a moment, knowing that something magical was about to happen, something that had been happening in kitchens and bakeries for millennia. The dough was about to rise. The waiting was its own kind of work, requiring a different sort of patience than the active labor of kneading. Eleanor settled into her rocking chair by the window and let her eyes rest on the covered bowl in the corner, knowing that beneath that cloth something wonderful was happening. The yeast was waking fully now, consuming the sugars in the flour, releasing carbon dioxide that would fill the dough with thousands of tiny bubbles, transforming it from a dense ball into something light and airy. She had tried to explain this process to children who visited the bakery, had tried to convey the magic of fermentation in terms they could understand. The yeast are like tiny workers, she would say, eating their dinner and breathing out bubbles that make the bread fluffy. The children would not, seriously, pretending to understand, but she could see the wonder in their eyes, the sense that something miraculous was happening, something that could not quite be explained. The rain continued its gentle assault on the windows, and Eleanor let the sound wash over her like music. She thought about all the rainy nights she had spent in this chair, all the loaves she had watched rise, all the transformations she had witnessed. Each one was unique, and each one was the same. That was the paradox of bread, eternally new, eternally ancient, always surprising, always familiar. Time moved differently during the rising. Then it stretched into something elastic and hurried as if the clock itself had decided to rest along with the dough. Eleanor felt her breathing slow, her thoughts gentle, her awareness settling into a peaceful state that was neither quite sleep nor quite waking. This was the gift of the rising, this enforced pause, this invitation to simply be. She thought about her grandmother who had sat in this same chair, watched dough rise in this same corner, listened to rain fall on this same roof. Her grandmother had been a woman of few words but many wisdoms, a woman who had taught Eleanor everything she knew, not through explanations, but through example. "Watch the dough," her grandmother would say. "It will tell you what it needs. Listen to the bread. It has its own voice." Eleanor had been listening for 30 years now, and she had come to understand what her grandmother meant. Bread did have a voice, did communicate its needs to those patient enough to hear. The dough would tell her when it was ready to be shaped, when it needed more time, when the oven was too hot or not hot enough. All she had to do was pay attention, stay present, remain open to what the bread was saying. An hour passed, perhaps more. The fire in the oven had burned down to coals, and Eleanor arose to add more wood, building the heat back up for the baking to come. The movement felt good after the stillness, her body grateful for the stretch and bend of tending the fire. She checked the temperature of the stones with a practiced hand, noting how the heat felt, how it distributed, how much more burning would be needed. When she returned to check the dough, she found it transformed. The cloth that covered the bowl had risen like a small tent, pushed up by the expanding dough beneath. Eleanor lifted the edge and peered underneath, smiling at what she saw. The dough had doubled in size, its surface now dotted with small bubbles, its texture lighter, its potential fully realized. The first rise was complete. Eleanor carried the bowl to the counter and uncovered it fully, admiring the transformation that had taken place. What had been a tight, dense ball was now a billowy cloud, fragrant with a particular smell of fermentation, slightly sour, deeply complex, unmistakably alive. This was the moment when bread became more than its ingredients, when it became something with its own character, its own identity. Eleanor plunged her hands into the dough and gently deflated it, feeling the air release between her fingers, hearing the soft sigh as the bubbles collapsed. This seemed cruel to those who did not understand this destruction of what had taken so long to build. but it was necessary. The deflating and reshaping would create a finer texture, a more even crumb, a more beautiful loaf. Sometimes you had to release what you had made to make something even better. The shaping was quick but careful, Eleanor's hands moving with the confidence of long practice. She formed the deflated dough into a smooth round, tucking the edges underneath, creating surface tension that would help the loaf hold its shape during the final rise and the baking. The loaf was beautiful in its simplicity, no elaborate braiding, no decorative scoring, just a perfect dome of dough waiting to be transformed by fire. She set the shaped loaf on a wooden paddle dusted with cornmeal, covered it with the cloth once more, and left it for its final rise while she prepared the oven. The coals had burned down to a perfect bed of glowing embers, and the stones of the oven were thoroughly heated, radiating the kind of consistent warmth that would create a perfect crust. Eleanor raked the coals to one side, swept the floor of the oven clean, and tested the temperature one last time. The final rise took less time than the first. The yeast was fully active now, the dough warm and eager to expand. Eleanor watched it grow, saw the surface stretch and tighten, knew when the moment was right. This was the knowledge that could not be taught from books, the intuition that came only from years of watching, years of waiting, years of learning to read the silent language of bread. When the loaf was ready, Eleanor uncovered it and made 3 quick slashes across its surface with a sharp blade. These cuts were not decoration, they were necessity, giving the bread room to expand in the oven's heat, controlling where it would burst and how it would grow. The slashes opened like mouths, revealing the soft interior, ready to release the steam that would help form the crust. The moment of loading required precision and courage. Eleanor slid the paddle into the oven's mouth, positioning the loaf in the center of the hot stones, then pulled back with a quick motion that left the bread behind. The dough settled onto the stones with a soft sound, and almost immediately it began to change. The heat was working its magic, killing the yeast, setting the structure, transforming raw dough into something new. Eleanor closed the oven door and stepped back to wait. This was the hardest part, the not looking, the not touching, the trust that the bread would do what bread had always done. She busied herself with cleaning, wiping down the counters, washing the bowl and the paddle, sweeping flour from the floor, but her attention never fully left the oven, her ears tuned for the sounds of transformation happening within. Time passed, the rain outside had gentled to a soft mist, and through the window Eleanor could see the first hints of dawn lightening the eastern sky. The night had passed, as nights in the bakery always passed, fully, productively, in the company of flour and fire. Soon the village would wake and her customers would come and the day's work would begin. But first, the completion of the night's first loaf. She opened the oven door and felt the rush of heat against her face, smelled the intoxicating aroma of fresh bread, saw the loaf transformed. Where there had been pale dough, there was now golden crust, crackled and gleaming, risen high and proud. The slashes had opened into ears of darker brown, and the whole surface had the particular beauty that only a well-baked loaf can achieve. Eleanor slid her paddle under the bread and drew it out, feeling its satisfying weight, hearing the crackle of the crust as it met the cooler air. She set it on a rack to cool, though she knew she would not be able to resist tasting it while it was still warm. This was her reward for the night's work, this first slice, this first taste, this confirmation that the magic had worked once more. She cut into the loaf and watched the steam rise, saw the interior, the crumb revealed in all its beauty. Thousands of tiny holes evenly distributed, the signature of well-developed gluten and properly risen dough. She lifted a slice to her lips and bit in, closing her eyes to better savor the flavor. It was perfect. It was always perfect. This simple miracle, this transformation of flour and water into the staff of life. The dawn was breaking fully now, pink and gold on the horizon, the rain finally ending, the world waking to a new day. Eleanor stood at her window with warm bread in her hands and gratitude in her heart. This was her life. This was her gift. This was the first loaf of another night, another day, another chapter in the endless story of bread and the people who make it. And it was good. It was very, very good.